This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Good evening, everyone. Hi. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. So, you heard my name is Marian. I did curate this exhibit, which I'm very happy about. I made the burial shrouds and also the container that's in the window, which I'm calling at this moment a spirit carrier, but its name may change. I'm wanting to talk this evening about green burial and home funerals, and I don't know if everyone actually knows what that means, and so I thought I'd just give a little bit of information about that. I'd also like to talk about other cultures and the burial customs that are in place in other parts of the world, which are often much more colorful and engaging than the ones we have here in the United States. Our culture has a bit of a denial of death. So part of this show also, part of this talk and this exhibit was to sort of give a little kick here to say, wait a minute, let's think about it, let's look at it. I want to talk also a little bit about home funerals, the sort of the nuts and bolts of that, the legalities, the practicalities, the emotional and social benefits of those sorts of practices. And I have information from various organizations and people who, it's okay, hi Shoshana, various organizations and people who advocate for the consumer. There's an agency called the Funeral Consumers Alliance. There's a woman in Sebastopol, California, who has a company called Final Passages. I'll talk a little bit about her. She's really a pioneer in the natural death movement. Let's see. I have some books and other information. And I have also, not to worry, I have a sheet here that I'll hand out at the end that has a list of some resources, some books, some internet sites you might want to visit, and so you don't have to worry about writing everything down that I say here. I also want to let you know that I'm forming a legal church to do this work, and so that's something that's in process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And the name of the organization that I have formed is called A Fine Farewell, which I kind of like. I took a business course last summer to dispel myself of the fiction that I don't know how to run a business. And during the course of that, what we had to do in the first evening was go around the room and say what we were there for, what was the business that we were starting. So you can imagine we went around the room and said, okay, I'm opening a coffee business or a home improvement business or a computer business, and we got to me and I said, burial shrouds, and everyone got really quiet. And after that, I took this course for 12 weeks, and so they were a little alarmed, I think, that I kept showing up. And I was the death lady or the creepy lady or the Halloween lady. But every week I just came in and spoke about what I was doing and why. And over the course of time, after the jokes and the funny, I got a lot of great funny names for the business, people started to understand that this is something that you could actually talk about, that you could think about, that you could use your creativity to work with. And there was a point in the class when a gentleman said, so you could have like a theme funeral. And I said, yeah, you could. Like if my dad is like really into hunting or animals, I could paint those kinds of things on the casket. I said, yeah, you could. So that was kind of the big opening there. And then, at the end, we had to give a presentation of all of our business plan, et cetera, what we had gotten to that point. And I encouraged one of the members of the class to model the shroud that I had brought, the prototype. He was game. And so after I gave my talk, I laid him out on one of the big tables. We cleared the table. We put the shroud on him. And I said to everyone, now, here it is. Imagine. This is the last time you're with this person that you love. And here they are covered in this beautiful silk garment. And then you cover their face with this piece of silk, and you wrap these edges around and you tuck them in. So here was this person, a live person, but in there, completely covered by this shroud. And everyone got very quiet. And some people teared up. And in the end, people came up to me and said, you know, I just didn't get it until tonight. I really didn't get what you were doing, but I get it now, and thank you. And someone else said to me, it's creepy, you know? And I said, you know why it's creepy? It's creepy because we never talk about it. And someone else in the class said, yeah, and when we do talk about it, we talk about it in a creepy way. So that was very helpful, you know, so people just really started to get it. And I started to understand that in addition, come right in. I think there's a few seats here and there, and there's a few more at this end. Where was I? In addition to, I lost my train of thought. It's okay.
Creepy.
Creepy. Oh, thank you. In addition to making the shrouds themselves, which was the initial doorway for me, that I became really clear that this was going to require a lot of education and information in lots of different creative ways. So that's what I've been about ever since. Oh, let's see. Green burial, I guess you could say green burial in a way is sort of the next thing in terms of all of the kinds of consciousness that we've had, you know, starting out with natural foods, organic foods, reclaiming home birth, lots of things that all of us here have been working towards and with for many years. And this is kind of the last frontier, you know, death, the way we look at death. And we could do it in a way that is ecologically sustainable and that is consistent with our values and that is conscious. So that's, the term has been coined. I don't know who coined it, but that's what it's being called now, green burial. The way that I found out about it was when I was in England a few years ago. I was in my friend's office looking at her bookshelf, and there was a book called The Natural Death Handbook. And I picked it up and started to read it, and it just really resonated. It had a lot of information about green burial and about ecologically sound burial practices and about not using embalming because of its toxicity and about reclaiming the rights, the rite of passage that funerals and death can be. And so when I came back to the United States, I actually don't remember how the idea came to me to make shrouds. I had already painted silk, and I'm an artist and had done a lot of other things, but something put the idea in my mind to make a burial shroud. So that's how it started for me. And then, as I said, taking the class and talking to people, and over this period of time, I've become really aware that education is a big piece of what I want to do. There is a burial park in South Carolina, I believe, called Ramsey Creek. I think it's the first one in the United States that's a natural burial park. It was started by a doctor named Billy Campbell. He got a lot of flack from the people initially. People were very concerned about things like polluting their groundwater. Right, exactly. There was a little leap of thinking there that needed to be made. He fought, and he had the backing of his medical profession, you know, and his degree there, so he had some authority with which to speak. But after a while, people started coming to him and wanting to be buried in his natural burial park. It's a place where a person cannot be embalmed. Any of the materials that they are buried in have to be biodegradable. There are no headstones. There are trees or perhaps small markers. Some places are thinking about using, is it GPS? Global, I don't know, but some sort of a way of using that to mark where the spaces are so that there's no visible headstone or anything, so that what is created is a place that people can go and enjoy nature. And also what happens is that the body completely decomposes into the earth. And in my thinking about all of this, when I became aware of the toxicity of embalming actually puts hundreds of gallons of toxic, known carcinogenic fluids into the ground every day, every time someone is embalmed and buried. And just that alone was shocking to me to finally realize. But the other part of that for me was the realization that when we don't return our bodies just as they are to the earth doesn't have a chance to compost our bodies. And I think that's also, in addition to the pollutants that we put in the earth, which are bad, the things that we don't give back to the earth, that's another piece of what's wrong here, what's causing a lot of problems with the earth. And there's some really interesting information. A friend of mine just told me about a convention that she went to where a mycologist spoke, which is a person who is into mushrooms, mushroomology, whatever. He was talking about using mushrooms to clean up things like what had happened during the hurricane at Katrina. Also, that mycology can be used to clean up lots of environmental pollutants. So that's sort of a piece of information I tucked back into my head. And then there was a woman here who brought things from Eugene. Many of the things in this exhibit have been brought from artists in Eugene. And her name is Cynthia Beale, and she's done a lot of research about green burial and natural funerals, et cetera. And she came across a very interesting piece of information, which is that a casket put into the ground without a vault or liner allows the natural microbiology of the soil combined with the food of the unembalmed body, and it actually breaks down all the materials in the casket, including the glues. And that this is work that's being done at Oregon State University by Dr. Elaine Ingham on compost. So I'm kind of excited about that piece of information, that it's really doing it that way could actually heal the earth. So let's see. Welcome, come on in. Oops. I think there's a couple of more chairs over here.
I just want to ask a quick question. What is
Sure.
a burial shroud?
Thanks for asking. A burial shroud is a garment that is worn by the body, by a person who has died, to be buried. And it's a traditional burial covering or wrapping. I have, let's see, over here on my artist statement, I have a definition I'll quote. Shroud, that which clothes, covers, conceals, or protects, especially the dress for the dead. To shelter, a covered place used as a retreat or a shelter. Sometimes you'll hear in old folk songs, a friend of mine told me this, about a lamentation of a young woman talking about, I'll sew your shroud for you. Or sometimes in the Scrooge Christmas Carol, there was discussion in there about his burial shroud. And it's just something that we don't know a lot about, but I think it's a really beautiful custom to create a garment and to encase a person inside of it at their death. It's like a gift wrapping in a way. I don't mean that lightly. I mean that ceremonially in a sacred way, to cover for the last time, to gently clothe, tuck in the edges, or actually stitch the edges together. Does that answer your question?
Is a person cremated in that?
You can be. Yeah, a person can be cremated in a shroud. You can be buried directly in the ground in a shroud. You can be put in a coffin in the shroud. But it's like one of those things we have, for instance, in families we have, if a baby's born, it has a christening dress. There's some families, some cultures where a burial shroud is also passed down through generations. And it's just used, someone just told me this, a Tibetan custom is that the shroud is just used for the ceremony and then taken and saved. And so that any time a person in the family dies, they wear that same shroud. So that's another way of using it. The ones that I've designed, I had in mind that they would be buried or the person would be cremated in the shroud. But I'm just wanting to bring back these ideas to our culture. I also have a little piece of film that I'll show in a little bit. It's excerpts from an excellent documentary that was shown on public television. It's called A Family Undertaking. Good title. And it chronicles 4 different families through their process of natural burial. And also has information about the funeral industry and about embalming and some advocates of home burial. So I'll show parts of that. And actually, maybe they would want to buy a copy of that film to have it in the library because it's really good. I was talking earlier about our culture's denial of death. Everyone chuckled, so it seems like it's not such a new idea to think about that. But we do. We worship permanence, and we forget how impermanent everything is. And we're afraid to age. We're afraid to show any degree of getting older or any intimation that people might actually die. I mean, pretty much everybody's going to die. I mean, I know there are few people, and I'm not discounting this, few people who have the feeling that their body will ascend and not die, and I'm not discounting the possibility of that, but my observation is that there are a lot of people get born and then they die. So, and I really want to bring more sacredness to this whole passage. And well, here's a little quote from one of my favorite teachers. Her name is Pema Chodron. You've probably heard of her. She says, "For me, the spiritual path has always been learning how to die. That involves not just death at the end of this particular life, but all the falling apart that happens continually. The fear of death, which is also the fear of groundlessness, of insecurity, of not having it all together. That seems to be the most fundamental thing that we have to work with. We have so much fear of not being in control, of not being able to hold on to things. Yet, the true nature of things is that you're never in control. You're never in control. You can never hold on to anything. So my own path has been training to relax with groundlessness and the panic that accompanies it. Training to die continually." Those are so inspiring, those words. I'd like to do a little sort of partner exercise here. So just pick someone next to you, behind you, whatever. Just pair up, get a buddy. Doesn't have to be someone you know, or it can be someone you know. So as everyone picked someone here. Okay. Okay, so now wait a minute, I haven't started the exercise yet. So one person is partner Earth and one person is partner Sky. I could have said A and B, but that's so boring. So figure out which one is partner Earth and which one is partner Sky. You just determine that between yourselves. Oh, is there anyone who doesn't have a partner? Good. You don't have a partner? Good. We've got one for you. Thank you. Okay. So what we're going to do with this partner Earth and partner Sky little thing is that I have a question. When I ask the question, I want partner Earth to think about the answer and to spend a couple of minutes. I'll give you a timer. to answer the question. And partner Sky, just listen with your whole being. Make eye contact and just really receive the answer. And then we'll switch. No comment, no, it's not a discussion, it's just listening to the answer that the other person has for the question. Okay, so the question is, have you ever spent any time deliberately thinking or writing or talking about your own death? And if you have, what prompted it? And if you haven't, why do you think that is? Have you ever spent any conscious time thinking, talking, or writing about your own death? And if you have, what prompted that? And if you haven't, why do you think that is? Okay, so we'll start. Tell me.
I was just doing it inside. Yeah, at 12, I resolved the whole death thing because I saw this film of a black funeral in Cinerama, and they were celebrating. And I had just come from my grandfather's funeral. And when I saw about celebration, I said, no. And I felt all the stuff about death left me. And I was absolutely, totally thrilled. It wasn't until a few years ago that I found out they do the dirge on the way to the funeral, but they blast off like crazy on the way home. And it's like, I would wish that for everybody, because death is not to be feared, it's to be embraced. And I've never been feared of death since that point in time. In fact, I was too much on the other side, and I had to come back in balance, because otherwise, my work wasn't done here. And 4 years ago, when I had 2 strokes in Alaska, that was because I was shipping out, as it were. And I had to renegotiate with Source to say, I'm here. But it's still been a back and forth thing, because I thought this world is so screwed up, and I see it only in the last year or two, I see the perfection. It's like, holy mackerel.
Have you talked with people about your death?
Yeah, in terms of I don't want to be mourned or anything, because I'm just passing through, and people can do what they want to do, but for me, thinking about it, I like to be visibly invisible. Whatever that means. And this is so great what you're doing. Wow.
Okay, now you get to switch. Same question. Partner Sky talks, partner Earth listens. The question again is, have you ever deliberately thought, spoken, or written about your own death? And if you have, what prompted it? And if you haven't, why do you think that is? Okay, go. Okay, everyone. I know it's hard to stop. This proves my theory that actually we're all just dying to talk about death. Sorry. But it's true, really. I think it's really true. I think that, we have this cultural taboo, and people think it's morbid, or you're obsessed with death, or it's not appropriate to talk about death with your children, or various things. But really, we want to know. We want to talk about it. So thanks for doing that. And how was it?
Great.
So I hope that just this opens a little bit of more opportunity for you to go ask somebody else that you know and love. Hey, have you ever thought about your own death? And just keep talking about it with people, because the more we talk about it, the more our creativity will be unleashed, and the more we'll be healing ourselves and our culture. Yes, thanks. Something that I found out recently was with regard to the press on the hurricanes in Louisiana and the Gulf, was that the government was trying to restrict the photographs, was saying no more photographs of the bodies of the dead can be shown in the media in the United States. And we already know that some of that has happened with the bodies of our dead soldiers from the war. And it just really illustrates this thing, this large cultural thing that we are underneath of, how it's not okay to acknowledge death. But it's so important. It's so important. When my mother was dying, I said to my father, she just needs a little more quiet. Because he was kind of excited and fearful, of course, about it, and wanted her to keep having exciting visitors and lots of people to talk to and engaging and, keep going until the end. And I said, she's in like one of the most profound transitions of her entire life. This is the most important transition of her whole life. And he looked at me and he said, "No, it isn't." And I thought, okay, well, but that's the thing that we're up against. And I mean, at least I said that to him, and he can think about it, But I also got to recognize not everyone gets this, not everyone knows this, not everyone is even allowed to know this. So I give you all permission to know this and spread the word, please. There's a book that I think is based on a PBS series called Death, The Trip of a Lifetime. Isn't that a great title? I cannot, unfortunately, remember the name of the man who runs the show, but the book is in the library. I don't know if it's in this one, but it's in our public library. And in there was a quote in the beginning of one of his chapters. He said, about half the world, half the cultures in the world practice disinterment and reburial. And about the other half either think that's wacko, or they don't even know what it is, or they think it's a horrible practice. So in one way, I want to say that illustrates the wide diversity in our world culture. But also, it just made me think, well, I want to talk about this whole disinterment and reburial thing a little more. And I want to know a little more about it. And I found a website with some very interesting and beautiful photographs of tribes in Madagascar, which is an island off the coast of Africa, where they practice this. And it was in my research about shrouds that I found this, because I was looking up burial shrouds and trying to find other cultures' use of them and how they're made and how they're used. And I found that in this tribe in Madagascar, cloth is the wealth of the family. So cloth is something that is gifted at large family occasions and kept by the family, like we would have jewels or china or whatever in our culture. Cloth is it. And when a person dies, this cloth is gifted to the family, and strips of it are taken and woven, like we used to make those pot holders, just woven in and out together to make a covering, sometimes a shroud that the body is just completely wrapped in and buried, sometimes a covering that just goes over the casket. But then what happens in this culture is that the dead it's very important for them that the dead remain a part of the community after their death. And so they're given this cloth and they're buried. And maybe a year, 9 months, 14 months passes, and someone in the tribe has a dream of the person who has died. And the person who has died comes and says, "I'm cold." And what that means is that it's time to disinter them and give them a new blanket. So they do this process of disinterring the bones and cleaning them, and then they have this day-long celebration that's very joyful. Food and music, parents and children, everyone. There's this great video of them carrying these bones. They've disinterred and rewrapped them. And it's very joyful to carry them then to this place that is sort of half underground and partly above ground, that's sort of dome-shaped, and that's where the bones go. Now that is just, we don't do anything like that here. We just don't do that. But we could. And a friend of mine talks about being in India at the train station, and there's a family there with a lot of belongings, including a very long wrapped parcel that is clearly a body. And they're grieving and they're getting ready to travel. And it's clear that it's mom or dad there wrapped up, and they're taking them home. And it's not out of the ordinary. They're just going to get on the train with all their luggage, including this, and go home. Now, you can't do that here either. But it's just important to know that other cultures are doing that, and it's okay. No one is dying from doing that. Well, so let's see. The other thing about the way that our culture has come to regard death and to the practices that we have around death have to do with professionalism, because I think our whole culture is sort of gone into this idea, this sort of worship of professionalism. And that means that we have to turn over these things to the professionals, the people who know how to handle this, as if we don't. And that's another thing I want to counteract, this idea that we don't know how to care for our dead, because only up until 2 or 3 generations ago, we did. During the Depression, a lot of people, you were just, if you died, your body was washed, in the dining room table, and then you were waked in the parlor. That's just how it happened. Oftentimes, there was someone in the family who made a casket, or they were easily available even at the general store. It was a community event, and it was much less, it wasn't whisked away. It was visible. If you waked someone in the parlor, that meant they were in your house for the days of the period of time until they were buried. That meant that you could go and sit in the middle of the night. If you woke up and you needed to cry or you needed to talk to that person, you could go down there, bring your rocking chair right up next to it, and have a chat. You could have a cry. You could touch them. You could hold their hand. You could notice that they were really gone. We don't have that. We're not allowed to do that now. We are legally allowed to do that, but culturally we're not allowed to do that.
I'm having a go-around right now with that aspect of
Are you?
my burial here in Ashland, where I want, because the Jewish community, which I'm a member of, has that process called Fiberglass.
Yes.
And they wash the body. There's always somebody sitting with the body. Always in attendance with the body.
Yes.
But I want my body to be available to any friend or anybody else who wants to come in and see me anytime, day or night. And they don't want to allow that.
Who doesn't want to allow that?
The people who have the funeral policy.
I see.
That makes the
Right.
space available for the Hebrew tradition.
I see.
And this is something I want
Yeah.
in my contract.
Yeah. Well, you could do it at home.
It would be difficult.
Yes. Yeah. That addresses a sort of a long-term dream of mine. I'm glad you mentioned the, is it Hevra or Shevra Kadisha?
Hebrew.
Hevra Kadisha. It's a lovely custom in the Jewish
It's a very,
community.
It's right instilled in all 3 of the
Yes.
communities
Yes.
in Ashland.
It's about caring for the dead. There's a ritual involved, bathing the body and wrapping it in a very plain muslin shroud, and then in a very plain casket. In fact, that's what this casket here is made by a man who's the president of the Jewish Burial Society here in the Rogue Valley. And this is kosher, certified by a rabbi. It's really lovely. It has no hardware, and it's biodegradable. Anyway, where was I with that? Yes, so the body is washed and prepared, and then the shroud is wrapped around it. And he tells me that there's a long belt that gets tied around the waist of the person, and the knots are tied in such a way that they spell the word God in Hebrew. I think that's really lovely. I want to create a burial society for the rest of us who are not in the Jewish tradition. I want to create a non-denominational burial society. And ultimately, I would like to have a place, that's a far goal, but I would like to have a place where anyone of any tradition could come and do what you're describing. It could be open for 24 hours. It could have a sanctuary. People could sit with the body as long as they needed to. So that's a long-range goal. But the first part, forming the burial societies, I have a meeting coming up on November 19th at the library. It's a Saturday morning. We'll be meeting from 9 to 11, and later on I'll pass around a sign-up sheet. If you're interested in coming to that meeting, I'd be delighted for you to come.
Is that at this library or the other library?
The other library, the public library. It's probably, let's see, close to time. Maybe another 5 minutes. I'll give you another little bit of information just about how, you might be thinking, how can you do a funeral at home if you're not going to embalm a body? Won't it smell? What will happen? All those things. But you can do it all at home. You can bathe the body at home. You can dress it. You can preserve a body with dry ice. That's what's most commonly used. You can get dry ice in inch or inch and a half thick sheets. There's a place in Medford that will cut it for you, and it comes in pieces about this size. And if you wrap them in towels and brown paper and then place them under the torso of the body, which is the most vulnerable area where the internal organs are. And people have done this. You have to change it regularly, but people have done this and kept a body at home for up to 7 days. Not everyone will want to do it for that long, but it's just important that you know that that's possible. And also that a body doesn't instantly start to decompose as soon as a person is dead. It's a gradual process. And some people have found it very comforting to observe that process really gradually. Some people have found that the tension or the fear that might have been in the body or in the face of the person sort of dissipates over time. I talked with a man who used to be a funeral director, and he told me that one of the things that made him want to do this so much was the light that came over the body often as he worked with it. He said it happened over and over. There was just something going on there. So, we think the moment of death when the breath stops or the heart stops is it. But there's a mystery there that we lose our opportunity to be in touch with when we give it up. So another thing that it's good to know, if you decide to take on doing a home funeral, there's those practical aspects of bathing the body and dressing the body and the dry ice and all of that. But there's also the idea that you could decorate the casket. You don't have to buy a casket from a funeral home. Even if you decide to use a funeral home services, you don't have to buy a casket from them. And some of these caskets here are examples of what you could do. There's the cardboard one in the back too. That's a standard cremation case. It's very inexpensive. It can be painted or decorated in innumerable ways. People have made photo collages. This has actually been a very wonderful thing that's happened over the course of this exhibit, where people have just written blessings or prayers or emotions or whatever on strips of fabric and tied them to this casket here, which is another way it could happen for people. You could write your messages on, you could paint it, you could set this up on sawhorses in the garage and let the entire family just work on it over a period of time at their leisure. It's a nice way for everyone to engage the grief process together.
I'd like to say one thing.
Yes.
About, we had a home service for my husband when he died, and kept his body at home for 2.5 days. And it felt so important to me as a transition period.
Yes.
Because one day he's alive, and then he's dead, and I'm living my life, and he's gone from this plane. And to be able to sit with his body and talk to him and hold his hand and touch him, I don't know, that transition period was so helpful.
Yes.
And when I see people, I had a very close friend, and when she died, she was in a nursing home, and we all went out to dinner, and the body wasn't seen again until the funeral service.
Right.
And to me, there's an abruptness there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have this transition, it really helps a lot.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's what I've been reading and hearing also, that people in the psychology profession and also hospice workers and nurses and doctors have been noting that families that do home funerals or have at least a bit of time like you're describing to be with the body move through their grief process much more quickly and feel more closure. I think it's probably time to take the break. After the break, I want to show this about 20 minutes worth of that film that I've sort of excerpted pieces from it, and it's quite moving. So we'll do that when we come back from the break, and then we'll have a little more time to talk. Thanks for your attention and participation. So I'll ring the bell when it's time to come back. This myself, so there might be a few jarring little things, but it's not bad. Okay. Yeah, there we go.
People are saying, oh my gosh, I've got a dead body, I've got to get him out of the house. Like now, you know, if you're keeping the body at home, turn on an air conditioner, turn off the heat, get dry ice.
Is that loud enough?
Seen families walk through that doorway, the doorway of fear. Ashes to ashes. Some people refer to me as a death midwife. I sometimes call myself a home funeral guide. It is legal in nearly all states to care for your own dead. It's far more simple than people think. If stores started charging $10 for a tomato, you'd go out and grow your own tomatoes. That's beginning to happen now with funerals. That's the best news. We're in such denial in this culture, you know, because we don't talk about death, and then we're suddenly faced with it. We think it's a failure, and death is contagious, even. And it's something we lose the battle to. It's a war against cancer, and a war against death, and a war against the inevitable. We've institutionalized the most important rites of passage in our culture, birth and death, and we've become very separated from those passages, which has then caused this huge gap of knowledge, and we're always afraid of the unknown.
If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life, for life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one.
What we don't know, what we haven't seen, looms out there like the big demon. And once we've seen it, once we've touched the body of our loved one, it's not scary anymore. What I call a home funeral is where the family is involved in creating and carrying out all the funeral arrangements. And it doesn't usually involve a funeral home or a mortuary at all.
Beat the drum slowly and play.
Ashes to ashes. Yeah.
I feel the home death movement is just an idea whose time has come. If you have a baby in a hospital, you have a birth plan. Otherwise, you get intimidated by the system. So, same thing on the other end of life. What's the death plan going to be, you know? In the 1900s, everybody took care of their loved ones. We died at home, generally. Family took care of us. We were laid out in the parlor. And then they would build the casket, or maybe in the general store, you could just go in and buy one. And then you'd dig a hole out in the back 40 and have a little cemetery on your property. This was just done as a matter of course in the families. And everyone knew what to do, just as they knew what to do when a baby was expected. Caring for our own changed somewhat actually around the time of the Civil War, because soldiers would die on the battlefield and then families would want them sent home for burial. And that's when the practice of embalming first began to take place. And then came the undertakers, and they undertook to take care of this for us, and with time that just became how families started dealing with it.
That is a fiberglass burial vault. I had a friend stop by one day and he wanted to know what it was. And I told him it was a grave liner. He said, "Who's that for?" I said, "The first one of us that needs it." Oh, I don't really know too many around that have done it since my mother's service, but there's been some around that have done it. Not only to save the cost of money, but they just didn't care to go to a funeral home or to a morgue and be bled and pickled. I bought 2 things from this fiberglass manufacturer. One for my mother that we've already used, and this one here for my father.
To be the funeral director that your license on the wall says you are. All families, regardless of who they are, the least of these or the greatest of these, they are entitled to a meaningful funeral experience. Are all of your funerals exactly the same? If they are, you might as well put up a sign out the front of your property, slowly going out of business. We have to be able to take the baby boomer consumer of the day to the ultimate economic offering that other industries have learned. It is called the experience. Disney discovered it years and years ago. We have such entities as Chuck E. Cheese, as Starbucks Coffee, and you are the caretakers of that right.
We're introducing the titanium urns for the first time. It appeals to someone that is very successful, wealthy clients, something they don't want a cheap urn. They want something that reflects their lifestyle.
In the gift industry, there's a saying, anything with a cat or anything with a heart. So much nicer this would look on your dresser or in any room in your house, really, versus a small urn shape.
People like this?
Oh, yes. They like this for personalization.
Toothpaste units in Freestyle.
I manufacture, deliver, and install what I believe is the world's best built personal mausoleum.
Traditional.
Nobody in the world built what we built.
Contemporary.
This is my partner. This is my wife, Faith. World's greatest woman, mausoleum lady.
This is the family technology. It is the finest replication electronically of a real candle flame. That candle itself will now burn for 11 and a half years. And they're indestructible. You can have
The funeral industry is very, very big business.
Rename's in here.
I think we've been willing victims. We're paying twice as much for a funeral in this country as they are in England, France, and Australia.
Take some of my information.
A typical funeral at a funeral home would include one embalming, one hearse, one visitation, one funeral ceremony, either at the church or in the funeral home, probably a limousine. And the average cost for that is probably $5,000 to $6,000, more in some areas. Adding cemetery expenses, if you're going for body burial, can add another $2,000 or $3,000 to that. In fact, it's not uncommon to hear of $10,000 funerals.
We're Permaframe, and we are the inventor of the Permaframe, which is a picture.
It's very difficult to be a good consumer when you're dealing with the emotions around a death. People are just in an altered state, I guess you could say. They're in shock, they're in grief, they aren't thinking right or thinking straight, besides the fact that they don't even know what questions to ask a funeral home when they go in. They're presented with certain material, but they don't know, to say, and sometimes feel intimidated to ask questions about, do you have a less expensive casket? Because it makes them feel like they're being cheap and they're not showing proper love and respect for their loved one.
There is nothing more significant that we do in this profession. In our efforts to create a meaningful, relevant funeral experience than good, conscientious embalming. What good is solid copper or solid bronze or a beautiful fine hardwood if the body is not properly prepared? Good embalming is the foundation of what you and I are all about.
Embalming, in my definition, is giving a person back their basic dignity after life. What the family is interested in is how mother looks, not whether not secondarily whether she's preserved, and certainly they don't consider mom a public health hazard. So what they're looking for is for a mom to look her best. We don't embalm in America the way the Egyptians did for forever. Typically, that embalming should last several days to several weeks.
Oh, that's a good point.
Embalming does not protect the public health if a person has died of certain diseases. That is the worst possible time to embalm a body. You're invading what probably is an otherwise intact body, flushing the fluids into the common sewer system. You're putting the funeral people at risk of bloodborne pathogens. It's the worst possible time.
Let's divide her in half. You guys are responsible for the left side. We'll be responsible for the right side. All right, now the first thing I like to do is your primary disinfection. Now we're ready to begin to pose her features. Everybody always gets eye caps. And you bring the eyelid down so she looks like she's sleeping. Needle injector, tap. Okay, now we have to think about the chemicals that we want to inject her with. Drainage tube always goes towards the heart. You know, plunge this back and forth to see if it busts up anything.
And that part is kind of relatively surgical and benign. The last part of the embalming process I find assault and battery. It's so grotesque. They have a long, hollow bayonet-type tool called a trocar with a suction hose on the end, and it gets jabbed in near the navel and then randomly stabbed around inside the body to pierce all internal organs, the lungs, the heart, the diaphragm, the stomach, the bowels, and they suck out whatever internal juices there are and then pump in more pickle juice. I think it's grim.
Very often, people have somebody taken away very quickly, and then later they regret it. They haven't taken time to spend with the person, and they're afraid that their body's going to begin to break down very quickly. And it just isn't so. For the most part, it just isn't so. If a family choose home-based after-death care, it's one of the reasons we actually recommend that they keep them at home up to 4 days for as long as they feel they comfortably can, and witness for themselves the fact that this person they loved and who was very vibrant and very present up until recently is truly not there any longer. You know, we're expected as a society, we care for our children in the case of child deaths, and they do occur, sadly. We're expected as a society to care for our children. We're required by law to care for them properly. And yet, for some reason, at the moment of the last breath or when the heart stops beating, we're expected as a society to then hand that care over to strangers. And that is unacceptable to me. And it was unacceptable to me when I had to make the very same choice. My daughter was killed very suddenly by an airbag in a low-speed collision, and she lost consciousness immediately upon impact and never regained it, and was pronounced brain dead within 24 hours at that time. And that's when the hospital told me that she could only be released to a funeral home, and I wasn't willing to do that. I wasn't willing to send her to a hospital morgue. I wasn't willing to send her to a strange place. This was someone I cared for from the moment she came into the world, in every possible way. And I wasn't going to stop here. My daughter was 7. And we had her here for 3 days, up in her bedroom, surrounded by her stuffed animals and her friends and her teachers and her grandparents and her cousins and aunts and uncles, and everyone could take as long as they wanted to say goodbye. And that was important. She'd left very suddenly, and we needed that time. Allison's older brothers were in the car when the accident occurred. And having her here at the house helped them accept what had happened to a tremendous degree. It wasn't as if, well, where's she gone and when are we going to see her again and all of that. She was right here and they could talk openly about it. And I think not to have things shushed up was extremely healing and helpful for them because there's a lot of joy in their memories of her and it will serve them for the rest of their lives. When a family really wants to keep someone at home for a while, but the nurse involved actually thinks that she's being helpful by calling the funeral home for the family. And the next thing you know, they've got a rattling gurney at the door and they come in with their body bags and zip it up and put someone you love inside and out they go out the door and tell you can bring their clothing later on when it's convenient. And all of a sudden your house is empty of this thing that has caused you so much pain and grief. Whereas if you stay here and stay involved, there's an amazing silence and beauty that begins to enter. And that contrast of those two situations of having someone you love be taken out the door by professionals or keeping them at home. And the contrast and the feeling of those two situations is exactly why I do this work.
Ready for cocktail hour?
Coming, I'm coming. Here's your shirt name.
Thank you.
Here's to the time of our life.
My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago. It was a pretty aggressive tumor. And now it's into her bones as well. It's her lungs and liver.
I can even breathe.
Shortly after the second mastectomy, I got very depressed. In fact, got drunk and very angry. And she just said, if this is the way you're going to deal with my death, you can't be part of it. And that just shook me to the core, and I realized that this was it. This is final. I didn't have time to be a jerk. My priority is dance. I don't have much of a future, so let's just stay in the present and be with each other and attend to each other.
I really think I'm very close. I'm going out of here soon. We gotta have this clear in everybody's mind so that they don't fall apart. Because people are used to having me in charge of stuff.
Yeah, I didn't choose the home funeral. Anne chose the home funeral. And I didn't find out that there even was such a thing until Anne told me that she was going to have one. She made it very clear that she wanted to die at home. And she wanted her body to stay at home. I think she decided to have the home funeral just because it's the way she's always done everything. She doesn't like an industrial approach to anything. And she finally had found a way that she could die and have a funeral that was in accordance with the way she lived her life. Anne died this morning at 2:49. You can't really prepare yourself. It's hard, and there's no two ways about it. We had a bowl of warm soapy water with some aromatic oils in it. Then the hard part was dressing her, but we managed to do it. And then we just laid her out. And she's there, she's very peaceful, and I think part of it is that it's a reassurance that she's not there. You know, you see this body, it's beautiful, it looks like you, it's not.
Very well.
She was never that cooperative to wife. Again?
Our Lord, we give you thanks today that we can remember and steward with love and with appreciation and with great admiration. And Dwight, the love is so apparent between the two of you, and it will never cease. Amen. It is eternal.
I'm a friend of the family, and I'm often described as the person who introduced Anne and Dwight. I had no idea what I was doing then. I just said, Anne, this is Dwight. And they, like the magnetic particles, came together and have stayed together, and I've seen a real marriage.
The bittersweetness of our journey is that the deeper we love, the more we are touched. Maybe the more we hurt, the harder it is to let go. But what a joy to love deeply. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, into the hands of God who lead our dear sister. Amen.
I think people go to the mortuary because they want to put those emotions away because they're afraid they're going to feel hurt. And, you know, it just isn't like that. You don't feel hurt. You feel intense love. It's not an experience you look forward to. But it is a transformed experience. Yeah, it is a transforming experience.
I have Kleenexes available if anyone needs them here. Let me turn the lights up again. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Okay. Could just sort of pass this around, pass it up and down the aisles or grab whatever. Thank you, Christos. That was really touching, isn't it? It's an incredible video, and that's just a little part of it. It's called A Family Undertaking. Yeah, over the course of it, there were 4 different families. It's about an hour long. It was a PBS Point of View special. Does anyone want to say anything about anything that they just looked at?
I have a question. Which states is it not legal in?
Oh, I wrote that down. Let's see. Oh, thank you.
Just curious which states it was not legal in to have a home funeral.
Well, it's Connecticut, Nebraska, New York, Louisiana, and I can't remember the 5th one. But what's so is that the laws in all of the states are kind of wavy and they contradict each other. And they're waiting to be challenged, according to Lisa Carlson. She was in that video, Lisa Carlson. She's written what is a most amazing book called Caring for the Dead, which I highly recommend. It's a lot of information in the first part, but the second part is a state-by-state listing of the regulations around home funerals and natural burials. And it's updated every year. You can get this book if you become a member of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, which is another really fine organization, which I recommend. I have all of these contacts written in the piece of paper that I'll hand out later. But the Funeral Consumers Alliance publishes a newsletter. They are advocates for people, legal and otherwise, regarding the funeral industry. They're filing a class action suit right now, actually. Let's see. It's against some of the larger conglomerates which have bought up the funeral homes, many local funeral homes. Most funeral homes are now owned by 4 or 5 large conglomerates. And there's the Funeral Consumers Alliance is charging that they have been banding together and boycotting independent casket sales and just keeping people from getting their consumer rights. So they're in lawsuit right now. But the Funeral Consumers Alliance is a great bunch of folks, and the membership is $25. And if you get a membership, then you can get this book for $15, which is half the price, half the regular price of it. And they also give you, when you get a membership, this great little packet, which they give a lot of information. But this packet is this nice little plastic envelope with a copy of whatever state you're from, Advance Directive, which is the legal information that you need to write down in order to affirm and have witnessed and signed that, for instance, you don't want to be resuscitated, or that if you want to be buried or cremated, or what, there's a lot of legal things in there. But they also published this little pamphlet called Before I Go, You Should Know. And it's just got spaces for various kinds of information, your vital statistics, where's the will, where's my Social Security information, who is next of kin, instructions, whether you want to be resuscitated or not. Do not put this information in a safety deposit box, which many people think that's the great place to put it, but it's hard to get to if it's there. After I'm gone, donate my organs or scatter my remains or whatever. Please do this at my funeral. Please don't do that at my funeral. Do I want a plain pine box, etc. Marking the spot, veterans markers, etc. Just friends to contact. Here's where my life insurance policy is. Here's my checking account information. Very practical information for the people who are left, all in this nice little booklet form. And they advocate that you put it in this plastic pouch and put it in your freezer. And you put this little magnet on the front that says, Matters of Life and Death inside. And that's one of the great things about the Funeral Consumers Alliance is their sense of humor. So that's, the information for contacting them is also available on the sheet that I'll hand out.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the backs of our driver's licenses, there's a place that says whether you want to be an organ donor or not.
Right.
And it kind of took me by surprise. So if that's check marked yes, that you do want to be an organ donor, then is your body taken away and dissected and you don't have any control over that?
I don't think that happens immediately, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
It would have to be awfully quick.
So you
Thanks,
just,
yeah.
I mean,
So?
you would have no control at that
None,
point if that's
yeah.
on the back of your license.
Right, and if you
So I
die.
wonder if you can go to the DMV and just get that removed.
Sure, I'm sure you can. Thanks, that's a good point. That's another one of those things I hadn't thought all the way out, but yeah.
When that happened, and I realized that was on the back of my license, they took me by such surprise. They didn't really ask me. She just quoted it after I got my license, and you're an organ donor and blah, 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 blah. And it really didn't Thank you, great, so, tonight.
Well, good. Other questions, comments?
Where can you bury the body? Right.
Need the mic,
Okay, the question was, where can a body be buried? It varies state to state, but in Oregon, our laws say that you can bury someone on your own land. Now, when you go to the vital registry office and you get the death certificate and you tell them that that's what you want, they will try to dissuade you. They do have some good reasons, but they'll just ask you to think very carefully about the fact that you may not always own the land where you want to bury someone. If you bury someone on a piece of land, it has to be registered with the state so that, people know. It may, their argument is, it may reduce the resale value of your home. But the other, one of the things that I had a long chat with David Coe, who is at the state mortuary board, and he said, we have cemeteries and they're sacred ground and they're set aside, and land that has been designated as a cemetery is not allowed to be used for anything else ever legally. Now, of course, we've all heard stories about roadways going through, but there is a level of protection on a land that is designated as a cemetery, and so I understand what they're saying. But it's true that if you live on land in Oregon, you can bury your dead on your land.
If you do bury your dead on your land, does that
I'll repeat the question.
Does that gain that status that nobody's going to mess with the place?
No, it doesn't automatically. The question was, if you do bury someone on your land, then does your land gain the status that it won't be messed with? And the answer to that is no.
So if you don't own any land, you can't bury yourself on anywhere except for a cemetery?
Well, if you don't own land, you can try to find friends who own land and who will allow you to be buried on their property. Mm-hmm. Or you can be cremated, as someone is suggesting, be cremated.
How about BML land?
That's a good question. BML land, I don't know what the deal is with that. BLM.
What a dichotomy that we're so saturated with killing and death on TV, and yet we can't talk about the real thing.
Thank you for
my
saying
question,
that.
When my father was 7, he lost his mother at home. She died, and he had memories of the embalmer coming to the house and embalming her and taking the bucket of blood, walking right past him sitting on the back porch, taking the bucket of her blood and dumping it behind the barn.
Wow.
Now, bloodborne diseases, with all the AIDS, and now we know that there's a lot of mad cow disease that we're not being told about. So how can you really bury someone in just a shroud or a cardboard box in the ground and have that not be a contaminant? I would presume that's why it's against the law. And how do you get around that? Or is it a good idea to get around it?
Well, let me just say, this is a quote from Dr. Jesse Carr, who is the chief of pathology at the University of California Medical School. Jessica Mitford, who wrote a book called The American Way of Death, asked Dr. Carr, she says, I wanted to know specifically how and to what extent and in what circumstances an unembalmed cadaver poses a health threat to the living. To my question, are undertakers in their capacity of embalmers guardians of the public health? Dr. Carr's answer was short and to the point. They are not guardians of anything, well, he says, except their pocketbooks. That's a bit of a... He says, public health virtues of embalming, you can write it off as inapplicable in our present-day conditions. Discussing possible injury to health caused by the presence of a dead body, Dr. Carr explained that in cases of communicable disease, a dead body presents considerably less hazard than a live one. There are several advantages to being dead, he said cheerfully. You don't excrete, inhale, exhale, or perspire. The body of a person who has died of a non-communicable illness, such as heart disease or cancer, presents no hazard whatsoever. So if someone has died of a communicable disease, as soon as they die, they're no longer a host for those organisms, and those organisms begin to die off. Now, in certain diseases, in certain cases, you must be embalmed. In the case of certain very highly contagious diseases. And I don't know exactly which ones they are, but it is legally mandated that you be embalmed. It's very certain cases. But in general, you heard what Lisa Carlson said. Actually, it's the worst time to open up the body. Another question.
Are there advocates available to people as they go through, either through hospice or at hospitals, that are available to help family members make these choices?
A good question, and that's what I'm wanting to promote. Hospice is a help, although not everyone in hospice really knows or understands all of this ins and outs of home funeral and burial. Right now, to my knowledge, I don't know of an organization that specifically offers advocates for this, and that's one of the things I'm trying to create. But, we can all just inform ourselves, become a member of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, read books, research this, talk to each other about it, and reclaim this.
Can you transport a body to a crematorium on your own?
Yes. You have to have the proper permit. In Oregon, the death certificate looks like this, and it's 4 copies. And one of the copies, I think it's the yellow one. So, yeah, there's a white, a pink, a yellow, and a green. I think it's the yellow one serves also as a transportation permit. You get this at the Office of Vital Records in Medford. It's on East Main Street in Medford. Yeah, there was a couple of people in the back row with questions.
So does an official need to come to the house and fill out the death certificate?
It has to be, you can fill out the death certificate yourself. It has to be signed by a doctor. Actually, Barbara has experience doing this. Do you want to address that question, Barbara? There.
In December, I had the honor of working with a 93-year-old woman that was like a bonus mother to me. And Alice just was a very spiritual person. She lived up on Orcas Island in the San Juans, and religion was not her thing. And so we did a home funeral for her. And I had to call 7 different mortuaries in Seattle before I could find someone that would work with us on the terms that we wanted to do to cremate her. And I also found that I had to do a lot of PR work with the recorder's office to be able to get the death certificate. And the doctor knew what we were doing because we had talked to him about that she wanted no intervention. And so he was a great support to us. But I think it's something that's coming. It is doable by law. You have all those rights yourself. And you sometimes have to work through the system a little bit because we're educating people. We're helping them find that there's new ways of doing it. Mm-hmm. But it is doable by law.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Barbara. What I've heard people say is that often going through this process, the people that are employed by the agencies aren't even themselves always aware of what the law actually says. And sometimes their own beliefs or prejudices have gotten in the way. So it is a lot of educating. Yeah.
So if you don't own your own property,
mm-hmm.
How does it work with cemeteries? Can you take, if it's not run by a mortuary, or if it is run, can you take care of that yourself? And
you can. Every cemetery is different. But yes, theoretically, and I think, legally, you can do that. You just have to make the contacts. I tried calling this afternoon and I didn't get a call back, but our cemeteries, we have 3 cemeteries in Ashland that are administered by the city. And I wanted to know, and I'm in the process of trying to figure out, what does that actually mean in terms of our legal rights? I mean, I think it means that we can transport the body to the cemetery ourselves. There is a fee for opening and closing a grave. Some cemeteries require that you purchase a grave liner. It's not required by law, but the cemetery, they may have that requirement, and the reason that they like that is so that the grave doesn't cave in and make it difficult to mow the lawns around there. I hope that's enough information. But I don't know. I haven't found that out. That's another piece of research for me. Yes?
Disposal of cremation ashes. Do you know what the local requirements are?
They're pretty loose. I think I just read recently something Lisa Carlson said was there aren't any cremains, which is a new term, because ashes are really not what they are. They're actually bone fragments that are left when a person is cremated. So cremated remains has been shortened now to the phrase cremains. But there aren't any cremains police. So like when you get the urn or whatever, get the ashes, and you are legally entitled to have them, and then you can sort of do what you want with them, provided you don't, like I just read an article recently that people were putting cremated ashes up in sacred sites in Mount Shasta near the wells, and that's not good. I mean, they are non-toxic, but you don't want to clog a sacred water source. But you can scatter them, or people have put them in small containers and give them to different friends. And you just told me this story, and people are sort of reconnecting with the family and saying, well, now Lisa has been here, and now she's over here, and some of her is over here, and so she's being a world traveler after she's gone. So does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions? Oop, wait for the mic.
Talking stick.
My husband died in Salem, in Oregon here, and the doctor was a friend and very supportive of my keeping his body at home. But when she went to file, I don't know, the death certificate or some kind of legal paper, she found to her surprise that legally, I wasn't supposed to keep the body more than 24 hours. It was supposed to be out of the house in that time. And I've never investigated that further. We kind of stretched the timing a little.
Good. My understanding is that that's not true. What that may be referring to is the idea that a body needs to be embalmed, they'll say, if it's going to be around more than 24 hours. But it also says, or refrigerated, which dry ice will be the method of that, and that's how you can get around that. So I think that was a misinterpretation. And it may have been, again, that experience that I was describing earlier, that the person in the office themselves doesn't really know the statutes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I have some friends in Washington State recently who just, through a series of pretty amazing circumstances, found out that the laws were just about to be changed. The wording in the funeral law was just about to be changed that would have eliminated people's right to do home funerals. And the phrase in most of these laws in the states where home funeral and home burial is legal, the phrase says, the funeral practitioner or person in charge of the body. When that's the phrase, those little 4 words or whatever, or that's the phrase that gives us the right to do this. Well, they were just going to go through that law and sort of clean up the language and strike some antiquated things, and the funeral service practitioners knew exactly what it would mean if those words were stricken from the record. And my friend just happened to call the office and find out that right as they spoke, this was in referendum or in legislation. They were in it. So she marshaled forces, went. Did you go to that? Barbara went. Barbara's one of our warrior women. They called the Funeral Consumers Alliance. They got help from Lisa Carlson. They got copies of these books to bring to all the people in all the different offices. And they had to go through a pretty intense educating of these people. But they did it. They did it. So they maintained our rights. Go ahead, Barbara. Microphone.
Well, it was a stroke of luck that one of our members lived down in Olympia, knew what was going on with the state legislature, and just happened to find out about that law. But in the end, it was almost an easy sell to the committee that was making the final decisions, because the appeals that 5 of us made was just about storytelling about our family members or our friends, and how that right of having a home funeral and everything that we've seen tonight and what Marian said. And each one of those people responded with, yes, I remember when my mother passed away. And I wish I would have done that with her. And so we decided that we couldn't try and, contradict this with the heads, that we had to go for the heart. And every single person you know in this world has family members that have passed away. And that was the end result, where they just kind of melted and said, we would never want you to lose those rights. We do not want to lose those rights.
Thanks, Barbara. And thanks for doing that. There's a question on the front row here.
I don't know if this is on the topic, but regarding advanced directives, my mom is 89. She's in Pennsylvania and is in an assisted living home. She has an advanced directive. She does not want to be resuscitated. But my sister, who lives near there, was recently told that there's a law, at least in Pennsylvania, that if you're in an assisted living home, they have to resuscitate you regardless of having that advanced directive. If you're in a nursing home, they said they don't have to, but in an assisted living place, they would be put out of business, or they would be legally liable or something if they did not try to save her. And that's got us a little disturbed, because what's the point of having one of those then?
Right. I don't know about the laws in Pennsylvania. I know that in Oregon, there's a form called a pulsed form. It's either bright pink or bright green. They just changed it recently. Pink, is it pink? And that's a form that you fill out and post very prominently. And if the medics arrive and they see the pulsed form, they will not try to resuscitate. So maybe there's something comparable to that in Pennsylvania. I don't know.
Now, my sister asked to be sure if that was really true, and she was told by several sources, yeah, we absolutely have to resuscitate, or we are put out of business.
Seems like some kind of legal document could be drawn up between you and her and the facility.
It does seem that way.
That's her intention. But, I mean, you would think that would be the pulse form or that, but it might take an extra piece of documentation.
So what would happen?
Another question, hold on.
So what would happen if you lived in one state and had this directive drawn up and moved to a state where that was considered illegal?
I think there are versions of this advanced directive for each state. And so you would just get the one from your state. And if you're a member of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, you could call them and ask them for help figuring that out.
So what if you died in an accident in another state that was...
That's also, there's a little bit of information that comes in this packet about if you die while you're traveling. I mean, it's a whole other set of considerations. In fact, they also recommend that you bring this with you while you're traveling. So I don't know all the answers to all of that, but I know I can sort of direct you as where you might find the answers to some of your questions, and they're good questions.
If somebody died in a state where home funerals were illegal or whatever, could you transport that person out of that state?
Yes. Part of this, someone did a study about advanced directives and found out that a lot of times, a very high percentage of the time, advanced directives are not followed. But the times that they are followed, the deciding factor is that the person has an advocate, like you were saying, has a relative or family member with moxie who's going to just stand there and say, look, this is it. It's signed, it's dated, it's legal, and you just keep doing that, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah. I also have been told that if you're married, that's one of the rights of the partner to decide what happens to the body.
Yes, I've heard. There is actually a chain. I don't remember the exact order, but spouse is first in line, and then various kinds of next of kin. But that brings up an interesting point, because if you're a same-sex couple, you need to draw up a legal document and have it notarized and make that available so that you can be part of that, because you could be pushed right out by other family members.
In your experience, do attorneys, estate attorneys, are they sympathetic to this, or do they have knowledge of a person's desires for home births?
Home birth.
I'm just home
I
deaths.
like the slip.
I'm just wondering if you needed legal assistance, is that available? Or is
I
it something
actually
that they
don't
need to
have
be
personal
educated on?
experience yet with this. I think that there are sympathetic lawyers. It's part of the work I'm doing to uncover all of that. And the Funeral Consumers Alliance, again, they're helpful with that. So I would imagine that they would even have referrals for people in various states. So that's a place you could go. Yes?
In reference to the pulse, the pink paper,
Yes.
I found what works for me is I've got it on my refrigerator and not in my freezer, and I've got a photocopy of it in my doctor's file.
Good.
And a photocopy in the file at the temple. So they act as, both of them act as my advocate if for some reason I have a problem.
Yes.
And I've also investigated and found out.
Can you put the mic closer to me?
I've also investigated if you can have your cremains put in a city cemetery here if you want.
Oh.
For the price of $100, and you can go down there and you can pick out your space.
Okay, thanks for that information. Oh, thank you.
I came in a little bit late, so I may have kind of missed this, but it'd be really encouraging to me to know if there are cases where people are actually doing home funerals from hospitals. Is that really happening? Because what we were seeing here seemed to be more the person was dying at home, and then there's kind of a continuity there. Is it happening yet
Yes.
that people are
Yes.
being taken home?
Yes.
Okay.
People are being taken home from the morgue and from hospitals.
Okay, and here, literally in this valley, how much notice is necessary and can it happen? I work at a hospital and would love for this, if I meet someone tomorrow that's into this, how much lead time is necessary to get this set up, and who do we call, and how do I make it happen?
Good questions. I'm not sure of the answer. I'm not sure what the process is in the hospital of filling out the death certificate.
I got to do it 2 days ago.
Oh,
actually, with
well, there you
someone,
go.
so, yeah.
Because once the death certificate is in the hands of the family, if the family has decided to do this, then they, with you, your assistants, would fill out the death certificate. Then, when they have that in hand, they have the right to transport the body.
Okay. So, yeah. Get the ice and go for it. Okay.
And there's also, there's a tag that is needed. Do you know about the tag? Is it the same in Washington? In Oregon, there's a tag. I had trouble getting them to give me one at our local office, but the State Mortuary Board told me there wouldn't be anything wrong with me acquiring a supply of these tags and these forms, because the tag goes with the body, and there's a number on the form and a number on the tag. So the cemetery sexton or the person at the crematorium has to verify that the tag on the remains, the number on that tag matches the number on the death certificate, so we're making sure that we're burying or cremating the actual person that we think we are. So that's another little piece involved in there that you might check in with. But yes, it's totally doable, and you can encourage families to do that.
Now, something to be aware of, a friend of mine died. Her husband called 911. She was dead.
Oh.
And they called, whoever called it's a medic team, that came out, ambulance. She was dead. There was no question of her being dead. They ended up charging him $600 or $800 for them coming out and attempting whatever they did, even though she was dead. He didn't call them. So you need to be ready to defend yourself if that should happen.
Yes, thank you. And it's very much stated in a lot of the literature, don't call 911. Don't call them.
So who would you call?
Well, if a person's already dead, there's really no need to call anyone. You can simply begin the process taking care of it yourself. The next morning, if it's a night, then you can go to the Office of Vital Registry, get the death certificate, bring it home and fill it out. You can get the dry ice. You can do it all yourself. You might want to call the doctor. If a person dies from suspicious causes, that's another. You do need to call the medical examiner or the coroner. But if a person has died at home and they've been ill and they've been expected to die, you don't have to call anyone right away. There's a question over here, yeah.
Something to be aware of that I learned from a realtor just yesterday
was that she was involved in a transaction that involved the sale of a parcel that included a loved one who was buried on this parcel.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And
So how did that go?
they had a willing buyer, they had a willing seller, and the bank saw that there was no recording of the burial on the property, so they considered it a cloud on the title and they refused financing.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's good information. So it's important to register that. Huh. Even though they had a willing buyer. Wow. We're going to have to close off. This might have to be our last question because I have a couple little more pieces of information. So,
Are there individual crematoriums, or are they all associated with funeral homes or morgues?
that's a good question. I think there are individual crematoriums. In Ashland, we have Litweiler Simonson Funeral Home. They're both lovely men, Tim and Mel, and there's a crematory right there.
Oh, okay.
There's, you know, that's true, but you know, the Neptune Society has changed hands and it's not the same as it used to be. And their price for cremation is quite much higher than it used to be. So it's not the same kind of organization that we used to think it was. Can you do it yourself? Not in Oregon, but in some places like Colorado, I read a beautiful account of a cremation on someone's land. It takes about 4 to 6 hours to burn a body. The people that were involved in the account that I read were members of the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is people that dress and reenact medieval times. So these people got together and took one of their own on the property, they found someone from the local Zen hospice who had attended a couple of cremations in India. He said, I'm not an expert. They said, you've seen more than we have. So he came and explained how to lay the fire. They had their herbalist from the SCA come. They had linen strips soaked in essential oils and herbs. They wrapped the body. She made a preparation of rock salt and lavender for people to strew onto the flames periodically. They brought the body in. They placed it on the fire and lit the fire, and her son was standing above. It was sort of burned. He was standing above it in a kilt with a claymore, which is a very large broadsword. And he stood there, and when they lit the fire, he swung it through the air as if to cut the ties. And then he held it like this and stood guard over. And then they had to call the fire department, who stood by, at a respectful distance. But after a while, they said they just invited them to come over. It was 6 hours. They had food, they had songs and stories. They would throw the salt on the fire, which would release a scent and also colors. It sounded so beautiful. So, 2 minutes. Oh, I'm okay. All right, I'm going to pass out. This is a list of some of the sources of information that I've talked about this evening. I'll pass these out. Here's a pen and my card as well. Let's see. Pass that. Here's another. Oops, excuse me. Probably need more down this row. There we go. Oh, whoops, wait a minute. I didn't give you the ones with the cards on it. Sorry. There. Pass that sort of both ways. If there aren't enough, let me know. I have a few more here without the cards attached. I want to say that if you want to go to the Burial Society meeting, if I can pass this around, or before you go, please give me your name and phone number, or just come to the library at 9 o'clock the morning of November 19th in the Gresham room downstairs. It's just the first meeting. We're just going to talk about what we think a burial society might look like. But eventually I'd like us to meet regularly and articulate a ceremony that we can learn and do.
Would you say that again? When and where?
Yes. It's November 19th. It's a Saturday morning at the Ashland Public Library. It's the Gresham room downstairs, and we'll meet from 9 until 11.
Tim, who you just mentioned, for Little Society,
Yeah.
can tell you a little bit about a burial society through his experience with the Handbook.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I know Paul, who's the president of that, Paul Fernstein. So I also, in this idea, thank you, does anyone not have one of these that wants one of these? No, we got them all, okay. You've been wonderful, thank you. There's been a lot of information I'm getting out here for you. I want to just say that the name of my organization is A Fine Farewell, which I did already say that. I'm in the process of forming a legal church so that we can work together and do this work, this grief, ritual, death midwifing work. So I have long vision. I welcome assistance and all of your information, and hopefully I can do more public talks like this. I can envision regular grief rituals. I'm imagining taking that casket and finding a place where we can have a public bonfire and burning it. And then thinking we could do that on a semi-regular basis. There's so much we could do to reclaim all of this and hook up as a community. That's the other piece. This is going to be really incredibly nourishing to us as a community. So thank you so much.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.